Today, we're going to talk about the pursuit of happiness. And last week, my wife, Jan, did the talk, who is here today. Thank you for doing that in my absence, Jan. And it was a very interesting talk, and I hope that you will go back and listen to it if you have not. But in that talk, the audience here, the Sunday conversation, you guys talked about happiness, but Jan was talking about joy. And I thought, joy, happiness, joy, aren't they the same thing? No, they're not. And I thought, wow, we have been taught about the pursuit of happiness in life. And really, it should be about the pursuit of joy. Happiness happens all along the way, but I can, go to a fair and get on one of those fancy rides, and I can be happy as heck, and I can be yelling and screaming and hooting and hollering and having a great time, and I'm happy, But if my kid's a drug addict, and I know that, I don't really truly have joy because I have unfinished business. And now I want to tell you a story about what happened to me yesterday. So I did a radio show, and I was by myself. I actually listened to the Sunday talk that you guys did last week. And on the way home, I didn't really have anything to do. It was Saturday afternoon, and I decided I think I'm going to go over to the cell phone store and get my dad's phone turned back on and make sure that I save his phone number and all the people he's interacted with. And as I drove up to the cell phone store, there was a lot of cars and people, and I went in, and the guy says, "Sorry, you can't come in without a mask." I said, "Well, they're not enforcing it in this county." And he says, "Well, our company has a policy." And I said, "So how am I supposed to do business with you?" I said, "I want to do some business with you." He says, "Well, I can help you outside." He says, "But it's going to take a little time." And I said, "Okay," because I'm not going to wear a mask. I just don't want to wear a mask. Now, if I feel like I should wear a mask, I'll put one on. But like we've all found that wearing these masks is the equivalent of putting a chain link fence on our face to keep mosquitoes away. It just doesn't make any sense. So I don't want to sit there with a mask on for a half an hour, whatever it is, waiting my turn in a cell phone store. So I stood outside. What happens next? This is how God works. There's a purpose for everything in our lives. And if we are driven to go in the direction God takes us through our obedience to Him, then we find ourselves in a position to do God's work. So this young man comes walking up, and he is lighting a cigarette as he's walking up. And I thought, well, he can't go in the store smoking a cigarette. And he knew that, so he comes right next to me, and he's a young man of 25 years old, and I know because he told me. And he stands there and smokes a cigarette, and he says, "What are you waiting for?" And I said, "Well, I'm waiting outside because I don't want to wear one of those silly masks, and there's a lot of people in there." And he says, "Yeah," and he's spitting, and he's smoking, and he's spitting, and he's just, kind of I guess the word would be degenerate, by his own choice. But there was also something I could see about him that was sweet. I don't know how to even tell you how to picture that. He was a young man, nice-looking young guy, didn't have tattoos all over him, didn't have really any marks of the world on him, just looked like a young, decent kid. But what came out of him was so sad to me. So we started talking. I said, "I'm going to wait out here, and you're behind me, so you can either wait out here or go inside." And he goes, "I'm going to wait out here." So we stood there and started talking, and I said, "That smoking's going to kill you." I said, "Everybody's worried about the COVID." I said, "You're probably going to die from that smoking." He goes, "Yeah, I know." He goes, "Dude, I smoke 100 cigarettes a day sometimes." And I thought, no, he's got to be joking me, right? That's like, what, 5 packs? I said, "How can you even afford to do that?" He goes, "Oh, I got a good job." He goes, "But I was a tweaker, man. I was a tweaker. Cigarettes are better than," what is that? Meth. Yes, meth. So he's either pulling my leg or he's telling me the truth. I said, "So you call yourself a tweaker. What is that?" He goes, "Shooting up." And I go, "Why would you do that?" He goes, "Oh my God, I love being high." And I said to him, I go, how old are you? And he says, 25. And I said, he goes, I've been a tweaker for 10 years, since he was 15. I said, how do your parents let you do this? This conversation was amazing. He says, my dad said, it's time for tough love. He says, at first, they didn't know I was a tweaker. And he goes, and then when I was about 17, my dad said, it's time for tough love. You can't live at my house and do that crap. And he says, so I went and lived at a flop house. I go, what's a flop house? And he says, it's where all the tweakers gather. It's an empty house. And he says, it's hell in there. It's hell. Everybody's trying to steal from each other. And if you fall asleep, he goes, you can't sleep. He goes, so you got to stay high. You got to stay awake. You got to tweak all the time. He says, and they'll kill you. He says, and they'll steal from anybody. They'll do anything. They'll rat you out. He says, anything is game in the flop house. And I said, why would you do that? He goes, because I love being high. And I was like, oh my gosh. See, now I've never been high, so I don't know what that is. But this kid was so addicted. He says, I have addictive personality. And I said, so how did you get off these drugs? I'm standing in total disbelief of what's coming out of this young man. And he says, well, I went to a farm. He says, this guy, he goes, I found this guy online that you could come and work at his farm and he'd help you get off drugs. So I went to like Iowa and worked on a farm. He goes, then the guy hurt himself. And he says, and then I just, I came back home. And he says, but I got off, the drugs. He goes, but now, man, he goes, now I'm kind of starting to, drink too much. And he goes, and I smoke one right after another. He literally stays on those cigarettes. And he says, and I know I got to quit. And I said, so how are you going to quit? What are you going to do? He says, I don't know. He says, I honestly, he goes, I need help. I really do. And I go, well, what do your parents say? He goes, my parents, they judge him. He's bad. He's just a bad egg. So he can't get help from his parents. And I go, well, where do you live now? He says, I live with my grandmother. And I said, well, God bless her. I said, she's at least given you a chance, right? And I started talking to this guy. And let me just tell you that there was a sweet little boy inside of that person, inside of this hardcore, called himself a tweaker. And when you call yourself a name, when he had literally just decided, well, that's me. I'm a tweaker. And I said, do me a favor. I go, you're not a tweaker anymore, are you? And he says, no. He says, I got to get rid of these cigarettes because the cigarettes were kind of in his opinion, and the alcohol were his ability to not have to go back. He goes, but I got the urge to go back. He goes, I'm really always on the edge. He goes, and I get so pissed off at my dad. Right? Here's that thing again. That thing. Mom and dad are divorced, and all children look to their father on earth. If you can't love the Father on earth, then you can't love the Father in heaven, right? So he is hating his Father on earth for whatever. We don't know, and I didn't ever really find out. But this conversation went on for an hour, and I'm thinking to myself, if they come out, I'm going to tell them, no, this is more important. They never came out to get me, just so you know. We were out there for an hour and 45 minutes waiting in the hot sun, and both of us. So the conversation continues on, and he says to me at one point, he says, well, I'm a Christian. And I thought to myself, isn't that interesting? He views himself as a Christian, yet he knows that he's completely addicted to cigarettes and alcohol. And I said, an interesting journey you've had. Yeah, he says, yeah, I've been arrested 50 times. And I'm just thinking to myself, this is a handsome, perfectly good human being that has thrown his own life away. I said, you have nobody to blame but yourself. I said, because you can choose to get rid of all this stuff. You can choose to seek help. You can choose to go to a pastor at church. You say you're Christian. I said, but guess what? God may have sent me today to talk to you. I said, so maybe God has chosen you. Maybe you have a purpose in your life that you have yet to realize. And I said, don't you want to realize what God has for you? He says, yeah, I do. He goes, I pray all the time. I said, well, maybe your prayers are being answered. I said, why are we standing out here? Why am I not inside where it's air conditioned? Why are we standing out here talking right now? I said, because God knows you. God sees you. He hears what you're going through, and he's sending people to help you. I may be one of them. So this conversation went on, and I got to tell you, it was heartbreaking. He's a handsome kid. He's got a job, and he's bought himself a car. He's got to fix the car he bought. He wants to buy a house. I said, don't you want to realize all those dreams that you have for yourself to be a success in life? Isn't that the pursuit of happiness? This is why this came up. And I said, but first, in order to find joy, you have to learn how to be whole. I said, right now you are filling the holes in your wholeness with all of these, what do I want to say? All of these distractions. This is the devil who also wants you. The devil who also wants you will give you all these things to distract you away from your Father in heaven. I said, matter of fact, if you keep on drinking and smoking, you'll never be able to realize all these things that you want for yourself, because you will then eventually fall back into being a tweaker. I said, you're on a journey, my friend. I said, you are on a journey, as we all are. And I said, you have to do a few things that are going to aid you in this journey that you're on. First of all, you have to get serious. If you say you're a Christian, it's easy to say, I'm a Christian. I said, you have to ask, what is a Christian? What is expected of you by your Father in heaven? He wants your obedience. You've been disobedient, haven't you? I said, you can think that you're a Christian. You can call yourself a Christian just the way that you think you're a tweaker and you call yourself a tweaker. I said, but are you a tweaker? I said, the problem is there's a tweaker inside of you that wants you to be a tweaker. That's the dark side. And I would talk about the movies, the Force be with you and so on. So this is a young kid, so he could be able to understand where we were coming from with all this. But this conversation was so interesting. And then every time we would get to about the end of one of his cigarettes and he would start jonesing for another cigarette, I got to get another one. I'd say, all right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to make you conscious of those cigarettes. And you're going to now, every time you light one, I want you to stop and look at it and see it for the enemy that it is. You think it's your friend. It's not your friend. It's keeping you hostage. It's holding you. It's a chain that is chained directly to the dark side. And it's each one of those little cigarettes is another link in the chain that holds you down. And I said, so you're going to be aware of it. I said, and after I'm gone, you're going to think about me every time you light one of those cigarettes, which is going to make you aware of the cigarettes. And you have to be conscious that cigarette is a nail in your coffin, and every one of them. And you're going to nail that coffin so tight with all those cigarettes. And I said, and the next thing we're going to work on is your drinking. I said, you have to be conscious of the drinking, why you're drinking. Don't keep putting yourself back into that hypnotic state. Don't keep putting yourself back into that sleep, feel-good state. You need to recognize that you've been disobedient. You've been disobedient to your parents. You have to love and honor your parents, and they probably told you shouldn't do this. You did it anyway. You cannot run from those consequences. The consequences are you will never find joy. You may find happiness in that moment for that fix. That's happiness. But joy is wholeness. Isn't that what joy is, to be whole? When you realize that you belong to your Father in heaven, and all the links of the chains of this world have no power over you because you are your Father's son, your Father in heaven. And if you're obedient to him and you love him with all your heart, your mind, and your soul, then he will help you. I said, you're trying to fight this battle by yourself. I said, do you turn to your Father in heaven? Do you turn to him and say, God, help me. Father, help me. I need your help. He says, well, every now and then. I go, no. I said, you need to do this every day. Every time you come across something that you don't know what to do, ask your Father in heaven. This is not a difficult thing. It's humbling because you think, I'll figure this out. I'm a big man. I can do this. I said, if you humble yourself in the presence of your Father in heaven, who is with you all the time, and you say, Father, show me. So this conversation went on for like an hour. And I got to tell you, as this conversation went on, this guy could not take his eyes off of me. And I said, what does your father do? And he says, my father works on generators. I said, your father works on generators? I said, well, I have a generator. What's his name? He told me his name. And I said, I know your father. Now, how weird is this? So guess what I'm doing today? I'm going to call to his father. Yes, I'm going to make a call to his father. And so am I being used in that moment in time by the grace of God for a father and son reunion? Possibly so, but also for a father and son reunion, the heavenly Father and his son that is on this earth. This kid had something so sweet in him that I got to tell you, it was amazing.
I think you touched on something very key. His disobedience to his earthly father is very important, and he needs to see he was wrong and be sorry that he's hated his father, because his father was standing for what's right. If he can truly repent and see, you know what? I was wrong and I'm hating my dad. If he can truly repent and realize his father was not the wrong one, he can be released from that hatred of his father. And that will be part of the unraveling of it all.
Yeah, the healing, right. Yeah. What's interesting about what happened with you guys last week is that every one of you spoke from the heart. As we get closer to God, as we become more obedient, and as we love the Lord, he uses us as like a musical instrument, because what comes out of it is music to somebody else's ears. Like the kid, what I was saying to him was music to his ears, right? It was music to his heart. And by the time it was over, the guy finally did come out and get me. And it was like perfect timing, right? We had said enough. He was walking off. He goes, I got to get another cigarette. And I said, just remember, be aware of that cigarette. And see, I was planting little, kind of thoughts in his mind. And anyway, I did my business at the store, and he was behind me, so he was next in line. And he says to me, when I got up to the counter, he says to me, hey, can I keep my place in line? I'm really thirsty. I need to get something to drink. And the guy says, yeah, sure. Go. He goes, just, be quick. So he says to me, he goes, you want something to drink? There was something so sweet about this young man. And so I thought to myself, thank God that he uses me. He, the Father in heaven, uses me to help free these souls, right? I mean, isn't that what we're all supposed to do for each other and for people that we meet in an elevator, on the street, at a cell phone store? And it's like, that to me is the Spirit of God.
And when that happens, something happens in return to you. You get something back.
Yeah, and what I realize I get back is more of that thing called joy. And joy is a beautiful thing. It's unselfish. It's just like the truth. It's the light. Joy is something that you feel that is the warmth, almost like the soul tingles. It is something that is from God. It's hard to describe. Anybody want to try and describe it?
I actually wanted to go back to what you were saying before. You wanted him to get in touch with his father. Maybe he hated what was wrong with his father. Now, his hate is his problem, but his father may have to see what his son hated in him and admit to that, and that will change the whole chemistry.
Totally agree. And in this conversation I talked to him about how we make judgments. And I said, there's a young girl who judged her father and mother when she was young, and she judged them because she disagreed with them. And a judgment is a really harsh thing, because it's like a giant piece of concrete in your soul, because we're not supposed to judge. We're supposed to discern. We look at something and go, well, I don't agree with that, but I'm open-minded because maybe I don't understand it. But when you make a judgment, they're wrong, like when we do with our parents. My parents are jerks. I don't want to have anything to do with them. Judgment, boom, piece of concrete in the soul. That's what he did with his dad. His dad may have been wrong, but his dad also is going through this journey of life, and maybe he's had some awakenings and he's changed. I said, how old is your dad now? He says, let's see, 65. I said, so when your dad was 55, maybe he was harsh on you. Maybe he said, get out of my house if you're going to be a tweaker. I go, was he really wrong? I said, or did you judge him as being wrong, which put that chunk of concrete in your soul? I said, you know what melts concrete? God. I said, because God is the judge. God doesn't want us to judge. So maybe you need to revisit that whole thing with your dad. And it's funny because I thought, well, I got to have this same kind of a conversation with my generator repair guy. And maybe he judged his son. Maybe the son is the product of the father in this case, right? Maybe he was too harsh on his. I've told you guys before, my wife used to call me the hammer. I was harsh to my kids. That hasn't had its effect. They have to overcome that on their own. I can help them as an adult now. But what I realize here is that we are all on a journey. And as the elders are further along on the journey, they can also help the younger folks to understand what's going on. But some of the younger folks that find the truth and the light early can help the elders to understand things too. So don't make any judgments on where you're going to hear the truth from, because as my dad said, you could hear it from a dicky bird. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Truth is truth. And what I love is when it comes from the mouths of babes, when the little children say something to you that's like a little beautiful little angel's voice that says, Grandpa, why does this or that? And you go, oh, that's beautiful. Now let's tell them the truth. Instead of like Steve Martin said in 1976, Mamu dogface to the banana patch. Do you guys remember that? He said, what if we were all kids and they played a mean joke on us? And when they, I want to go to the bathroom, I say, Mamu dogface to the banana patch. So, when I go to school, I raise my hand, teacher, Mamu dogface to the banana patch. That means I want to go to the bathroom. The teacher thinks I'm crazy, right? So it's like, we want to teach our children the truth, not some mumbo jumbo, not something that we were taught that part of our culture, children should be seen but not heard, right? One of our people that are not here today said that stuck with her for, 70 years since she was a little girl. She was 75 years old. Children should be seen but not heard. So for her whole adult life, she was quiet. But now as we find our voices, because we want to be obedient to the Father in heaven, and we're starting to awaken. And isn't it interesting that they call the people that are part of the matrix the woke? And it's like, wait a minute, where did that word come from?
Another false label.
Yeah, another false label is exactly right. They're not woke like woken. They're woke, which really, if you translate that, complete zombies, asleep. Just robots playing out some programming that has been put into them. They are literally in the matrix. They're stuck in the matrix and they're woke. We, who are awakened to the truth and the light, we are the awakened. And we're supposed to share that. And we're supposed to recognize that in others. And you can see it. You can see it. So the kid walks up to me. He walks up to me and I remember vaguely thinking, here comes somebody. And I want to talk about the knowing. Because don't we all have a knowing? And Fabian, who's here, who's my friend, often talks about the voice, whether there's a voice of God or it's a voice of, the devil in your head. That's the, what did you call it, Jan? The imposter voice. And so this is something that is very, it's a lot of conversation around this other voice that, can try and trick you, which I don't deny that there is multiples of voices in our heads. But what I've learned how to do is to really embrace the knowing, the unspoken, wordless words, as my father talks about. And the way that I see it in my life is this very gentle, very quiet knowing that comes upon me. And does everybody get this? Because I know I don't think I'm alone here, where you just know something.
Sometimes when I'm by myself and I'm quiet, that's when I know. Because there's nothing distracting me. It's there, and I have to see it and I have to know that that's God, because he doesn't talk with words. It's just he's there.
And so back to that again, there's that conversation about he doesn't talk with words, because to me sometimes he does. But also he gives me this knowing, be still and know that I am God, right?
We have some standard inside us, like a tuning fork. When the right frequency comes, it matches. And so the truth will ring true when it's true.
I love that guy, man. He's always got powerful stuff to say. Little pieces of, calling it a tuning fork. It's exactly right. It rings true. So back to this knowing. What I get, and I talked about this on the radio show yesterday to the entire Silicon Valley, and I said about this vaccine. I don't get all this intellectual stuff, science in my head, and I don't use that to make my decision whether to take the jab or not take the jab. Something inside, some little knowing, and I know what it is, and so do you, says, When I start thinking, well, maybe, what could it hurt? Not that I do, but if I even give it any thoughts at all, I gave you the knowing in essence, right? You have the knowing. If you have the knowing, you follow the knowing. That's called being obedient. God puts his truth, his word in your heart. Now, does that word actually have a word to it? No, that's why I say, It's more like just a little knowing. And so when I hear the knowing, if I can call it hearing, when the tuning fork resonates inside of my soul, I know, be still and know that I am God. Okay, I get that. I am obedient to you, Father. I want to listen. I want to hear. I want to obey, right? So the obeying part, okay, if you say, well, obey. It sounds like you're a slave to me. No. It's not that kind of obey. It's literally know that he who created the entire universe is speaking into me, and I shall obey. I do not have a choice, because what would be the choice other than to obey? To me, it's beautiful. This is what I call joy. Being obedient, obeying your Father. And there's a joy that we have no words for, I don't think, that when we obey, we know we're in the right place.
We are not gods unto ourselves that can just create and do things. How do I say this? We are either going to be subject to the truth or subject to the lie. In our whole life, the truth and the lie are presenting to us so that our free will can yield to one or the other.
Well, the way I see it in my life, I see that there's a constant competition for the imposter and that quiet knowing, right? So like, for instance, I'm driving here, right, and I start to get a little conversation or words of what I do perceive on whatever, and then it'll talk to it in my head. So that's like the way I see it. That is the knowledge of good and evil. It's playing out in my head, but I'm going to look at it, back off. No, I'm not going to. So I'm continually backing off of that because it's tempting me to accept it as the knowledge of good and evil, rather than just waiting and letting that come out if I share it with somebody. In the meantime, it's as though I don't know it, but I do.
So let's talk about outcome-based conversations. Don't we all have a kind of an agenda when we start talking about God and religion and our opinions, and we look for to win the argument, right? I mean, even if you think about in school, you have debates like a competition, right? And what I realize is that if I want to be God, then I want things to be my way or the highway. But if I want to be a conduit of God's message, then I want to be whatever part I am supposed to be. So I was thinking to myself when this young man finally, when I left and he left, I thought, did I convince him? Did I do my job, God? Did I convince him to give up smoking and give up drinking and give up tweaking and whatever else? Or did I actually just do my part? My little part. I just want to be a little part of that journey so that God used me to put a little bit of truth in his heart, a little bit of understanding, and then I walk away. Because see, I'm just a tool of God. And when you're rebuilding an engine, you got a lot of tools to use, right? I'm just one wrench. There's a lot of other wrenches that God is going to use to rebuild this young man. But if I have my will in it and I want to be his savior, then I won't let that kid go till I've pounded my nail of truth into his head and then he walks away bludgeoned, right? It's not the way it's supposed to be. It was a sweet conversation. It was a sweet parting of ways. And then when I found out I knew his father, I thought, my job is not done. And I didn't do it immediately because I thought, I don't want to be ambitious about it. God will show me when. And it's funny because I have some more generator work. Maybe it has to wait, right?
Because you are coming from a different place and the world is not coming from where you're speaking. You planted a seed in him, and it's up to him to realize that. And he does, he'll be free.
It's funny, you guys, we all like to talk about plants and planting in our gardens. And even if you don't have a garden, you can kind of understand what we're talking about with the planting of the seeds. But, I planted some grass the other day, and I got angry at the grass because we had a stump ground out, and then it was a lot of work. You got to get all the old grindings out and put dirt in. And I went down to the nursery and I said, what should I put in there? I want to plant some grass. He said, well, this is what we use over here for this and that. And you need to do this. And so I bought the tool to spread the grass seeds out just right. And I bought the grass seeds for fall, right? I mean, doing all the right things, trying to follow all the stuff that they tell you to. But what they don't tell you, and it's not anywhere in the instructions, is be patient. Because it's like they need to add that, don't they? So I spread it out, and we have chickens that kind of free range. They'll go out into the street. It's amazing none of them have been hit, but they're out there and they're hunting and pecking and scratching in my little, like the size of a tree stump that had been ground out. I'm like, this is such a simple thing, but the dang chickens are in there trying to find worms. So they keep turning it up, and I'm like, oh, get away. So I got a big piece of fence, and I put it just a few inches above the ground so they couldn't get there. And of course they get around the edges anyway, so I have to keep working on this thing. But for a few days I went out there and I would like, come on, grass, come on up, come on up. And that stupid grass would not come up. And it's on automatic sprinklers, and so what happened? Yes, my wife says until I left. So I was gone last week, and when I came home, there was grass, and I thought, thank you, God. And so what we have to do is plant our seeds, step away, and let God's miracle do its work, right? But I have to tell you, it's like this thing called patience. We have so little of it. And we use it so sparingly, as if, we're going to run out of patience. And we don't run out of patience. We have endless patience, endless love. And what happens is we think we're going to run out of love and patience. We're going to run out of it. But God replenishes it. And the more love you use, the more love he gives you, because he sees you're being a good steward of his thing called love. He gives you more of it, and he empowers you to use it because you're using it thoughtfully. You're using it obediently. And I have to tell you that is joy. When you know that your Father in heaven, the creator of all things in this world and the universe and everything, is empowering you to help another human being all by itself, that is joy. All by itself.
I think animals can also express something in language, because I'll tell you what happened. My girlfriend has a jaguar, okay, and it's sitting there because the man gave that to her. And the goats went with their antlers and was pounding on that door. They were like trying to destroy it or something. And so now she's selling it because it was just sitting there.
A Jaguar car. So it's funny, a story about a Jaguar. I was before he passed away with Regis Philbin, and from Regis on television. And he gifted me a Jaguar when I helped him do a new car. And I ended up, selling it to my dad. My dad's British. It's a British car. And then my dad got a little newer one later on, years later, and he gave it to my brother-in-law, who took it all the way to Texas. You guys may have heard this story. And then there was a lightning storm one night, and he had it in his barn. And lightning came, and it was just, the cows were scared, and they all ran into the barn and jumped right up onto the hood of that Jaguar. I said, just mushed in the doors, and he says, it's destroyed. But he says, I'll fix it. Don't worry about it.
I had some comments about about what Chuck was saying about maybe he saw something in the father that was wrong and that needs to be addressed, possibly. But I also had a realization about, and I think I've said this before, that we all think if our parents would have been just better or perfect, we would have been better. But what I realize is that we all have a sin nature. And the sin nature in the children uses the excuse of the sin in the father to do the wrong thing.
Right,
And
the earthly father.
the earthly father, to justify why I'm doing this or that, because that kid had a conscience and he knew before he did his first drugs that it was wrong and that it was a forbidden thing. Somewhere in him he knew, and he yielded to the forbidden. And that's where he's going to have to take responsibility. When the father told him he couldn't live here anymore, the kid made a choice, the drugs over the home. So he made several choices that weren't right, that he has to own and stop judging the father. Even if the father has faults, the father was right to say you can't do this in this home. Because I know many parents that say, well, I'd rather him do it in my home than out in somewhere else. And I think, there's a fine line there. You don't want to kick your kids out, but you do have to, you can't also indulge in their sin.
Well, I remember when, as a teenager, when I was stealing hubcaps, that I had this conscience that told me that was something that was wrong, but I found out that I could cancel out that conscience by continuing to do wrong. And after a while, you don't hear it. It doesn't. But that doesn't go away. Because when God chooses you, he chooses you, and you never know when it's going to reappear. It's going to come up.
I was thinking about this boy you're talking about, and I don't think if he didn't have some kind of conscience, there's no way he could have stayed and talked to you that long.
So I wanted to add to what your wife was saying, that he made a choice to take drugs. But what I see is that the resentments and hatreds set you up so that is a lower threshold to do. That really the little sins build up and put you further and further from your conscience. And the drugs is just another way to put you even further.
It's not the drugs. It's not the drinking. It's what's behind that. It's the hatred, the selfishness, the anger, whatever it is, that you comfort yourself with that, whatever it is.
It's also the curiosity of the forbidden. That's what Adam and Eve did. They didn't hate God to begin with, but somehow that was enticing. The forbidden is enticing.
So it's interesting you guys are talking about this, because I was thinking about this gal, Nicki Minaj. Does anybody know who she is yet? She's like a crazy rap singer that I don't think any of us would listen to half of one song and not turn it off. But to your point, Roger, she's famously wealthy. She had something like 25 or 29 million people following her on social media. Do you know what happened when she spoke up the other day, a couple weeks ago? Do you know what happened? I'll tell you what happened. She said, this is not right, what they're doing to us with these inoculations and what have you. And she actually gave a scenario of one of her friends or brothers or cousins or whatever that had an adverse reaction to the jab, and they tried to silence her. Now, in that moment in time, something happened inside of her, and she says, they are wrong for doing that. And all of a sudden, all of us that said, yes, Nikki, they're wrong for doing that to us or you or anybody. We have the First Amendment, which guarantees our freedom of speech. And she started speaking up. Do you know that her audience went from 25 or 30 million to 125 million online? So what does that tell you? How many of us have woken up? The woke are going to keep asleep, but the woken up, the awakened of us. Now, so we're following a rapper that we would never listen to her music, but we're listening to the truth that is coming through her. So we must realize that God does not judge us, even if we're, living this decadent life and we're filthy rich and we've lived this horrible life. God is waiting for us. God is waiting for us to say, you know what? There is a God. There is a right and a wrong. There is a truth and a lie. And she's now kind of a voice for the truth, which is interesting.
And she's not against the vaccination. Hasn't come out against it. She just said, think about it for yourself.
When you get afraid and you're scared and you are like a little kid in the dark and there's a monster under your bed, you have a choice. You can run and turn the light on like I did, or you can say, you know what? That's all a bunch of lies. It's all fake. God has got me. I belong to God, not to my fears, not to you, Satan. You can try all of your darkest things, because haven't we all seen nasty, scary things in our sleep when it's dark, when we're alone, when we're still and quiet? Here comes the devil to scare you, to make you think that you're a tweaker, you're a sinner, you're an angry, hateful, judgmental person. You've done all these wrong things. The devil knows your name, but he calls you by your sin. God knows your sin, but he calls you by your name. That's called not having judgment. And the problem is we get scared. We lose hope. We lose faith. The opposite of faith is fear.
The thing is with this fake vaccine is if you see from the beginning of the, what it really is a pandemic, you can see one lie after another, like, stay home, et cetera, do the opposite things that would be for good health from past history and from what we know. So I see it's separating people from what they know is right in their heart and what the outer world is saying and what all the propaganda and being accepted by all your peers, et cetera, et cetera. So if you give in to that and take their fake vaccine, you're as good as dead, in my opinion.
So this is the separating of the wheat and the chaff. At the end of the day, people will learn a lot of lessons. We look back, I talked on this radio show yesterday. One man called up and said, I was in Vietnam. They used to say there was nothing to that Agent Orange, didn't they, for 40 years? And here, 40 years later, all the people that died and all the people that, oh no, they just had cancer because, well, it was their lifestyle. Or, oh no, they had this problem because it was their lifestyle. Oh, it was genetics. Oh, the science. The truth is, Agent Orange was bad. Mustard gas is bad. Coronavirus, man-made and put upon us in this world, bad. Now, a lot of us know what to do to be able to safeguard against that. We used Dr. Zelenko's protocol. So there are ways to safeguard against this. You don't have to just get it and die, but if you're just living a decadent life and you just, well, I know I've been a tweaker and I probably deserve it. That's self-judgment. Don't judge yourself. God has a purpose for your life.
I'm just curious as to why there's no gathering of some people who have enough money to put a site up that shows all the people that have suffered as a result of that.
You talked about people with money being able to do this, but isn't the love of money the root of all evil? So you have people that have a lot of money. Those people can do good with their money, but most of them, they want to live the lavish lifestyle, so on and so forth. But There are people that are getting together, just so you know. It's happening more and more and more. But we must suffer. Sadly, that's our nature. We must suffer before, we learn our lessons. That's just the way it is.
I was resenting my mother because of her weak, frail nature. She's like gives in and she doesn't really see the obvious. And I was resenting her for that. And I wish that she would have thought for herself, because she got my brother to talk her into getting that vaccine. And she called me yesterday and she said she's doing fine and everything. And of course, she went through chemotherapy because she had ovarian cancer, and she came out of that all right. So, I'm just praying that she'll be okay.
Can I say something about last week? I was talking to Dave, said something. We were talking about free will, and Dave said, yeah, but all who sin are slaves. There seems to be contradictions in the Bible. While it's true that all the people that sin are slaves, but once you're baptized, you're different. You're born again. You're new. You're not a slave to sin, or you don't have to be a slave of sin.
You don't have to be. That doesn't mean that we aren't. Now, let me take off on that. We get baptized, and it's a very cultural thing. It's a biblical thing. And we think, like what you said, once you're baptized, you don't have to sin, but you're not a slave to sin. But we still do sin. It's I think, an outward way of saying, God, please save me. I'm a sinner. I want you to wash away my sins, right? The baptism, okay? Now that should be the beginning of our next journey, the next phase of our journey, shifting gears with the consciousness of, it's like a little tying a string around my finger. I've been baptized, so I better be a good boy or girl. But the reality is we fall off the back of the truck all the time. Just because we're baptized doesn't mean we're not going to sin. Just because we're baptized doesn't mean that the devil doesn't actually have a little bit of a leg up, because you think through this outward act that you are now born again. And the born again thing, I believe, happens from your Father in heaven only, when you are literally a new person because you have been obedient. You have loved your Father in heaven with all your heart, your mind, and your soul, and you are just a new person.
The baptism to me is kind of like a marriage ceremony. You're going in front of everybody. You're saying, I vow to be married to this person, just like I'm making a choice to go toward Christ in my life. You get baptized. But just like a marriage ceremony, you still have the marriage where you have to live it. You have to walk through that relationship.
Well, that's a good one. And I want to go over to a Catholic and talk about baptism.
I was baptized when I was probably 2 weeks old, so I didn't know what was happening, and I was circumcised at the same time, and I didn't know what was happening. Both of them are traumatic experiences.
I love that, man. That is so funny.
There's analogies in life, and I've told this story before. I came across a walnut orchard one time. It was an abandoned walnut orchard. It hadn't been used in years and years. And walnut orchards, they graft onto the root of a black walnut tree. They graft an English walnut tree. And I always thought that line of demarcation where the bark changes from black to white is like a baptism. And because it has the roots, they use the roots of the black walnut because it digs deeper and it has better root system or something. There's suckers that come up from the bottom of the tree. And if you don't cut those off, what they will do is they will drain all the nutrients from the English walnut tree. The English walnut tree doesn't get the nutrients it needs to grow and produce fruit.
It's interesting. Jan made a very good point, though. The baptism is the marriage, but then you must live it. You must live a righteous, godly, God-loving, obedient life. I hadn't done that. I thought that I had married a good girl and that I'm a good guy and I'm gonna be good and I'm one of God's chosen. I think I told you guys this. And so therefore, what did I become? I became kind of my own demigod. I decided that, well, God put me here for a reason. He brought that girl into my life. She's the one. He told me she was the one. She's the one. We're going to get married, and she's going to do as I damn well tell her to do. That's that God, that ego edging out God. And so I had an awakening, and I didn't wake up. I had a chance to wake up. God gives you these chances to wake up, and you wake up for a moment, and then the pain is too great, and you go off back into your life, not being obedient, not listening, not learning from that pain. So in my own way, a drug addict, the drug of life, right? Living life in excess to the fullest. A lot of us do that. We don't take drugs at all. We don't do anything. We don't smoke. We don't drink. But we are drug addicts to life. Food, sex, just gigantic ego, feeding that gigantic ego, just as bad as the tweaker.
A lot of people disagree with baptism as a baby because it's sort of like you're deciding for that child. Baptism is supposed to be a choice, just like when you ask somebody to marry them, it should be a choice. Baptism as a child is sort of like an arranged marriage, or they're just choosing it for you. But you have to choose it yourself at some point. You want to be married to that. Isn't the church considered the bride anyway?
You got to stop sinning. If you have the baptism and you go back to the old ways, it won't work. You have to cut off those things that you did before.
So what is sin? If you've talked about sin, the original word that Jesus used was an archery term, meaning off target or off mark. But really, if you look at it as off center, it's when you're objective, you can see your sins. You can see the temptation to sin. You can see the excuses. But when you're off center, you're subjective, and you don't see it, and it just hits you. It comes in without even you knowing it.
I see religion sometimes when people get baptized, they're just going through the motions. They haven't gotten to the root cause yet. And that's what they need to do, because it doesn't mean anything then.
Yeah, I was just thinking of something your dad said to a young man that had a smoking problem. He said, every time you take a hit off that cigarette, you're blocking yourself from a new destiny. And he tried to express to him that he had to learn to sit with the anxiety he felt without the cigarette. And I noticed in my own life, I have a struggle where, especially at night, I can't sleep sometimes. And I want to indulge in something to comfort myself. And I realize that it has something to do with the way I conduct myself each day. If I do something like, for example, I tend to be a little bit of a people pleaser. If I do that, I find myself feeling empty at night. Or even being too ambitious, trying to make something happen or getting upset. So to me, I'm still trying to identify all the things that hold me bondage to my particular weakness. I just think there's a connection that you started to talk about that we have to be to identify what's going on. And I think as long as you're doped up, you're not going to see the connections. A lot of people say, well, go meditate. What does that mean to somebody that just feels pain when they're meditating? For example, I find a certain pain in sitting still sometimes. I can't do it. And so I like to be able to hear people talk about the connection between the cause and the symptom rather than just go meditate.
So, what's funny? He says he feels pain when he's sitting still, but I don't think it's actually you feeling pain. It's the alter ego.
So one of the keys to meditating is not to have a look for an outcome. It's just to be there in the moment, and whatever comes, comes. And the pain that you feel, if you really sit still, you'll see that's actually the ego nature that feels the pain. And then if you separate it from it, you can actually see it as something separate.
So what's interesting is when we think about these cigarettes or drugs, food, these are all things that are material, right? That we can touch them and feel them. And, but what about that thing that is the enemy that's living in you, that is what is feeling that pain, which is what you're having to deny yourself. Like you just said, my father said that you have to feel that little bit of uncomfortableness for a moment. And it's the same way you need to let that thing in you feel that pain. If you can separate yourself from the pain, which isn't really you, then that thing in you is dying a little bit and not you. You're beginning to live. It is beginning to die. And so this is, I think, part of this process of this meditation.
No, I believe that's part of it. There's another thing where there's like a buildup of tension. because of the way I conduct myself during the day. And it's like I let too many negatives get inside, and then I'm just like, I gotta escape it. I have to turn off my brain. I mean, could there not be two parts to this rather than?
I would guess that whatever this pain is started in your childhood. It's the same pain. When you go to get still, it's the same pain you had way back. Whatever happened, it's that same pain. And you don't really know what it is. But if you just continue to look at it and really identify what that pain is to you, it might unlock something.
And we're very busy judging ourselves all the time. I hear Dave, by the way, I may have done this and I may have done that, and I was too much of a people pleaser and I was too ambitious, and you're just so busy judging yourself. You know what? Just let it be. Just be still. And in that stillness, there's no conversation of, well, I guess I was just too much of this, I was just too much of that. Just be still. And as you're in that stillness, you separate from the tornado of thought. And you'll see the tornado going around and around. That's not you. That's the dark side. That's the realm. That's the parallel universe. You don't want to be caught in that torment of the parallel universe, the stream that is flowing inside of you because you're a part of that world. You want to be on the world, but not of the world. You want to be inside of yourself. Boy, one of you folks really nailed it the other day. Who was it that said, and I think it was Chuck, our soul is, how did you say that about being caught inside the body because it's supposed to be?
Well, we have a dual nature. We have a spiritual nature, which has a consciousness, because your body does not have a consciousness. Your body, if it were without your soul, you would be like an animal. And if you've been around animals a while and haven't personified them and projected into them, you'll see animals are just animals, and they do what animals do. Dogs do things different than cats, and chickens do things different than sheep, and that's just what they are. And you talk to your dog, and his tail wags, and you think he's understanding you. I mean, it's not the same thing as talking to a human being. So we're dual-natured. So you have a physical nature with emotion, memory, thinking, pain, trauma, which is buried emotion, and then you have a spiritual nature, which has, among its attributes, is a consciousness, which looks at things with a different objectivity. That consciousness produces conflict between your spiritual nature and your physical nature. And that's okay. There can be a bad conflict and a good conflict. To see the difference between the two, it's all about energy. And there's something in you that has to wait long enough, like a baby in the crib, and see the energy and wonder as you're seeing the energy. In that peaceful, quiet place, you will begin to gravitate towards the right energy and to be sort of made sick with the wrong energy. And you'll just have to go through this helpless place.
When you feel that anxiety, you're either going closer to the light, where the ego nature is feeling the light and that's painful for it, or you're going away from the light and it's your conscious trying to drag you back.
So Dave, for you, since you were the one that said that comment originally, do you remember when you were a little boy and you wanted to learn how to ride a bike, and it seemed like it was going to be so scary and you're going to fall off and skin your knee and maybe break your tooth or hit your head, or it was scary until one day you mastered it, right? And then you were riding a bike and it was fine. Everything's great. I love riding my bike, the freedom of it, right? Then later on in life, you go, well, I want to drive a car, but it's so scary. What if I crash? What if I kill somebody else crashing into them? It's so scary. And then one day you learn how to drive and everything's fine and there's the freedom of it, right? You have the freedom of it. So right now, you're that little boy that is separating from kind of this other nature that Chuck was just talking about. And right now it seems so ominous and big. But one day you'll look back and you'll go, wow, I don't know how that stupid little angry little devil had such a hold on me, and it seemed like it was so impossible. But the day that you break free, because you reach out to your Father in heaven and say, Father, I need your help. I love you with all my heart, my mind, and my soul. This is a kind of a big process for all of us because our egos are like literally gatekeepers. They don't want you to escape. They don't want you to be freed from the prison of your own mind. But once you get to the other side of it, you look back, and like Chuck said, when the worldly things approach you, it'll make you'll feel an obvious repulsion to it.
You won't have a response toward it. It's no longer in you, is what Jesus said.
Well, it's not a struggle. And as long as it is a struggle, you're in this sort of this no man's land. And what I believe is that you are drawn out of this human nature that we were born into. And in the road out of that, there are certain realizations you have to be willing, your soul has to be willing to see. And you can't tell. You don't know what you need to realize next until it's done. And you may not even know until 10 years later you realize, oh yeah, that was a big deal. So you're being drawn out of that nature into another nature. If there's a struggle, all you do is watch the struggle. It's like being constipated. You watch the struggle until it's all gone.
That's a great one. That's a good one right there.
Everybody can identify with that. I say God will slowly draw you more into the spiritual nature and out of the physical nature if you go that path. There's a part of you that everybody will resist that. At some point you will say, that's enough. I'm going to be good and that's good enough. Or I'm going to struggle until I'm dying. You see people on their deathbed doing the same struggle, and I watch them, and I know that that's a mistake.
What I see is that, like Jan said, back to there's the marriage ceremony, and then there's living it. So as you're hearing all this, Dave, there's the hearing it, understanding it, and then there's when you leave here and you go back home, there's the living it. And there will be struggle. Nobody's going to escape this world without a certain amount of struggle. Just like the chicken inside the egg, you're going to struggle till you realize you don't have to struggle. Because the struggle is you, the man. You, the spirit, must reach toward the heavens and say, Father, help me. I have sinned. I repent of my sins. Please come and be inside of me and help me with this situation. What happens is as you do these things, and they may even feel strange to you in the beginning because that devil you're really sharing this corpuscle of a being with that other creature that's inside of us. And when you reach out to God, at first, you're dual natured. It's in you like roots inside of your soul. And so what you have to do, the pain that you're feeling when you're meditating is it dying a little bit. And that's why you feel it, because it's in you.
I sense something here, and I want to ask you, Dave. I'm sure, like everybody, you've had people in your life as a child that you had trauma.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
All right, so he said yes. And have you been able to, as far as you can see, let go of resentment toward those people?
That's an interesting question because I'm still having moments where, like, I've been hating my father for years. He's always been somebody to believe in authority. He let the schools raise us, and he was in a rush to go out and take the jab, and he's always saw me as a rebel. And something happened recently where I found myself going from hating him to all of a sudden feeling just awful. I get a hold of my emotions here. I begin to realize that I really don't want to hate my father. In fact, I don't know that I do deep inside. I don't want to hate my father. What is wrong with me? Why can't I love my father like the Bible says? And so, what's the block?
So when you had that emotion, what was that? What did that emotion say? What was the feeling of it?
It's basically a longing to do it right, that pain, of hatred versus, actually loving my father.
Okay.
I don't, I just feel pain. I don't, the emotion is just painful, that's all. I don't know where it comes from, what it is.
It's unfinished business.
Whatever's hidden in that whole emotional train, because as the emotion begins to poke up into your consciousness and it starts to come into your brain and go into your body and you feel that, it's pulling with it all kinds of other baggage. last week you used the analogy of a pipe, where a pipe, and the pipe gets clogged with things. This is where the pipe is clogged. And I have found that I always tried to deal with the bad and make it right, and I have found that doesn't work. And all I have to do is be able to watch as it all begins to float up in its own time and feel the helplessness of it and know what it is, but know that I cannot push it down like I always have, or push it to the side. And in that realization, it begins to change the chemistry in you. And what happens is things change, and you don't change anything. You just simply watch the process as it's going. Some people are willing to be made fools of, to be totally humiliated as a human being and be helpless, and some people are not. And I have found, because I have been through that, that's the only way I could do it, and just be humiliated.
So one of the prison guards that keeps you prisoner is something called pride. And pride keeps us from expressing, especially men, expressing ourselves in that way, because as I've always thought, crying is a weakness. And what I realize is that it is not a weakness. It is a prideful denial that there's something wrong. It's forcing it back down. The clog is trying to come out, and God is the plunger. He's pulling it out of us, and we are like something from below is pulling us back down, and it is the strings of pride, the strings of arrogance, instead of the humiliation that we're about to feel that would be the final let go and have a good cry and be done with it, as my dad would say. Have a good cry and be done with it. And like when my mom and dad passed away, for a little bit, I didn't cry. I thought to myself, well, how sweet that my father and mother have gone to the other side, until I started creating that video with our videographer, and I was looking for pictures of my mom and dad, and I got to see their whole life in front of me. Young people turning into parents, and then parents turning into, a couple with children, and the struggles they were going through. I could start to see it on my mother's face and my father, and I watched it as it continued to go on. And I knew enough of the history to be able to see all these things happening. And I just felt like this human experience is such a painful journey. It really is. It's a painful journey. But it's supposed to be difficult. It's like Jan said, and maybe Jan, you could repeat this. You said, if God didn't have some understanding of pain, he, of course, wouldn't have made that a part of us. And when he gave his son Jesus to us, and for him to set an example for us and give us an opportunity to know what our life is all about and to understand that there is something on the other side. But when Jesus was going through his suffering, did God look down and does he have feelings? Chuck and you had this incredible exchange last week. I would tell everybody to go listen to this. But God understands what we're going through. He really does. It's built in. It's part of his incredible divine, construction of us. So the big question last week was, did God feel pain as Jesus was going through the transition?
Well, if he didn't, what was the actual sacrifice then?
You mean God's sacrifice?
Yes, because it's saying he sacrificed, and if there was no pain or anything in it, what was he sacrificed something for us to be able to come back.
Yeah, the great unanswered question that we won't know till we get to the other side, because we only have what we know. We only have, we don't know what we don't know, right? We only have what we've experienced in our lives, so we have to assume that the Father felt a pain. I, as a father, feel pain watching my children suffer, but I also know that it's important.
And interestingly, Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son, even though he didn't have to go through with it. God somehow wanted him to understand what he himself also did. He was the father of the Jewish race, or the chosen people to bring his message, but he qualified him by asking him to do what he himself was going to do.
Suffer, to understand what suffering is and what pain is. Yes.
I want to just get back to Dave real quick. I think here, maybe you just ponder this, that all of the pain here has to do with judgment. Judging your father for his weaknesses. He's just another guy on this earth struggling like all of us. But when you judge your father, it's unquestionable that judgment is also going to turn on yourself. So when you sit still, I believe that there's judgment toward yourself for failing as well. And you need to be able to let go of all judgment toward your father, because when you sit and judge, you're separate from God. And you don't want to be separate. You don't want to be separate anymore, but you have to let go of all the judgment of everyone's failings, including your own.
No, I sort of sense that. I think it's a recognition that my dad is a decent guy. You know, the thought of him passing away like right now, you know, if I was left with that ugly judgment toward him, I think it would just be torment. And so, you know, when Alan, you were talking about how you never had a great emotion when your father passed away. I thought about that many times because I thought that's probably because you had a pretty decent relationship with him.
No, I did. I had a good relationship with my dad. It wasn't always good because I felt like my dad was very hard on me and he wasn't always right with me and I wasn't always right with him. But in the end of his life, I learned what true forgiveness was, because Jesus said about the people that were murdering him, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." So if we can't forgive our parents and we judge them, like I said, a piece of concrete in your soul, that's a bad situation to not be able to eliminate before your father passes away, which I hope you have that chance to do that, because you will feel much more free in your life. And guess what? The judgment you had on your father is really on yourself as well. Judge not lest ye be judged by the same measure, right? And so, wowzer, you go into a court and you tell the judge, "Judge, this is what I think. This is how it is." The judge is going to look at you like you're crazy. That's the same with God. You know, we tell God all the time, you know, our judgments, and God just sits back and says, "We'll see. We'll see." And until such times we realize we are not the judge. We are the ones that need to be forgiven, for we know not what that we do.
Well, I was going to say that I resented my dad because one time I came to a seminar with Roy, and I told him I liked it, and he didn't like me saying that I liked it. So he kicked the door in, and I stood there in myself, and I said, "Well, I can't help that I want to know the truth. And what is your problem?" You know, and my cousin, he saw that and he says, "What's wrong with your dad?" I said, "I don't know. He just doesn't want me to find things out for myself and trying to be a voice, you know, because I used to speak up as a kid and I used to get shoved down all the time. And I didn't like that because I had something to say."
You know, because as parents, we like to be gods. Our children are ours. And until we realize those children are given to us to be a good steward of these children, God's children. But when we play God, that's what your dad was doing. And I can tell you right now, as a father, when your kids start to wake up, it's an uncomfortable feeling, and you have to look at it, people. You have to look at it. If you feel uncomfortable when your children start to reach that age where they start to wake up and they want to defy you and have a good exchange with you, you're like, "How dare you? How dare you speak up to me, the God of your life? I'll take away your entire existence. I made you. I'll take you out and make another one that looks just like you." That's an old joke, by the way. That's how it is. That's how we are as parents, sadly, very sadly.
We're used to, too, living life. We're used to the comfort, you know, going into comfort and escaping into that. And meditation, like sitting still, you feel that pain. For years, I felt like a piece of popcorn is about ready to pop, you know, while I'm sitting there. But I persisted because I know. And when I came to like talk with Roy and stuff, you know, part of me really wanted to be accepted by him. But he kicked me in the ass, you know, even recently. And I know that that's what I needed. needed. That was the tough love I needed. And I know sitting still, it's gotten easier now, but I had to go through years of that discomfort.
John Voight talks about his journey. He was on his knees and saying, why? Why does it have to be so difficult? And he heard in his voice, it's supposed to be difficult. It is supposed to be difficult. So get used to it. Learn how to make that difficulty your friend. Actually, you can do that because you can say, you're here to teach me something. I'm going to learn from you instead of, get out of my face. Who are you? Instead of arguing with this thing. Understand that all these things in your life and all these people that you come across, even a good friend that disagrees with you, that's all part of this process called life. And you've got to hone yourself as steel sharpens steel. One man sharpens another. Learn how to have a conversation and be disagreeable but not hateful. Be disagreeable but not judgmental. Just hold your ground, and guess what? Maybe you'll find out the other person was right. But if you get angry, you're going to judge, and you're going to hold on to that like a piece of concrete forever. The truth will set you free from this thing, this prison in our minds, with that dual nature, because we do have a dual nature until such times as we are freed by the Father in heaven through our suffering, believe it or not.
Our natures are dueling.
Our natures are dueling, he said. That's a great way to end it. You guys, thanks for coming. This is a Sunday conversation, and I like the interaction with you guys. I think it's great. We should do more of this. So thanks for supporting the foundation, each and every one of you guys. Thanks for being a part of what we're doing for this thing called the Legacy Project, which is all of us being the voice. We'll see you next week.